it sounds like there's a gap between, what the central bank is saying and what the people are
Yeah, for sure.
experiencing.
I mean, I don't exactly know why the European Union is such a or at least in the beginnings of it was such an important project for peace in Europe and issuing like this additional currency, the euro, on top of that. For many, I think, who are super pro EU, is like it's like non-negotiable.
Keep 'em cold till I'm old. I don't plan to blow my load. Wallet so blue, if you know, you know. It's better than bonds, better than gold. Finna reap up what I sow. Fit money can't keep up, it gets sold. How many times you been told? DCA's the way to go. Higher highs, higher lows. Every year my network grows. Every day my network grows. Running relays, running nodes. Yeah, 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 yeah. Dollar a day's a minimum. Stats, zap sats. Any fear I get, I'm flipping them.
Felix, can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Of course. So yeah, I'm Felix. I'm working on Wavespace, which is essentially a company that's on a mission to enable you to live your life on Bitcoin, meaning that essentially we are trying to create the first €0 Bitcoiners in Europe.
€0 Bitcoiners in Europe. That's I've never heard that expression before.
Yeah, we coined it. I think I haven't heard it before, but that's kind of the ambition that we have. While there are some, it's not entirely possible as of right now, but we're working on it, and we think that hopefully within the next 24 months we can kind of move a lot in that direction.
So you mentioned that, so you're born in Germany and you also lived in France, which are two huge engines within the European Union, Germany and France. How did that happen? And then the question to ask, how did you stumble upon Bitcoin?
Sure. My father actually, after his studies, he started working for a French company and worked there for essentially his entire career. And at some point, it was just somewhat unavoidable because he was essentially just in France the entire week. He would only come home on the weekends. Sometimes, that was even difficult. So at that point, we just decided as a family that, let's go on an adventure and just move to Paris. And yeah, ever since then, my family, my parents live there. And so when I go home for the holidays, I'm in Paris. And yeah, regarding how I discovered Bitcoin, essentially, I think it was in 2017 when I was on holidays actually in Italy with my
Oh,
and I read an article about Bitcoin passing 3,000 US dollars and
3,000.
yeah, exactly. And I remember it was like one morning I was reading, I read this article and it triggered something. I was like, okay, but this Bitcoin, I heard about it before. I knew I heard about it before. And then I just remembered that I think 4 years prior to that, in 2013 or 2014, um, my dad actually asked me if I knew what Bitcoin was. And at that point in time, I didn't know, and I kind of discarded it immediately because he was like, "Do you know what this Bitcoin is?" Apparently, it crashed from 1,000 down to $200, and I kind of discarded it. And then a couple of years later, um, just discovering that it still exists, and apparently it hit 3,000. After it was kind of called to be dead and nobody really cared
Yeah.
anymore. I knew that even though I didn't understand what it was and I just didn't understand what made it special, I knew that there had to be something. Like these. It couldn't happen that again it reached 3,000, and then it crashed again, and what's gonna happen next? And it hit 20,000, then it crashed again, and so there has to be something there, and there was the point in time when I dived into it essentially. There was also the time when I switched studies. So previously I was studying mechanical engineering. And then because my dad is an engineer,
Oh,
my
okay.
mother is a chemist essentially. My brother is a physicist. So I was kind of pruned to go in that. And then, after like 1.5 years, I realized that, yeah, maybe I'm gonna kind of change and go to something that's more my vibe, which is essentially business, just like a generalistic business
Yeah.
studies with marketing, sales, and all that kind of stuff, and how to create a company and all these kinds of things. And I switched, but I also, was super interested in founding a company and in
Yeah.
understanding how how the economy works, and what's a central bank, and who decides how high the interest rate should be. All these kinds of questions kind of arose at the same time when I discovered Bitcoin. And so ever since that day, I don't think a day has passed where I haven't thought about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Like, well, yeah.
That's 8 years.
Like all of us.
Yeah.
So, so then, so your dad spoke about it in 2013. I'm guessing that in addition to being an engineer, he's quite curious and open-minded about the world as well.
Yes and no. I would say that definitely open-minded about the world for sure, but he always had a dislike for money. Um, I
Ah,
think which might have something to do with the fact that, he's come across a lot of kind of business and salesy people over his life, and probably many of those didn't leave a good impression. So this whole kind of economy, money topic was something that he never kind of cared for. So until this day, essentially, my dad hasn't purchased Bitcoin, So even though I've been kind of talking about it for, yeah, at least like 8 years, So yeah, let's hope we can change that maybe this year. Maybe I just have to set it up for him, and just take care of everything, and
yeah.
just give him his hardware wallet and explain it, and that's it. Um, yeah.
So I did like I was born and raised in Canada, and in my third year of university, I lived in France for the first time. And if I can like sort of look backwards, I feel as though French culture is a lot more sound, if I can use that term, compared to culture in North America. And so by my like sort of limited overview, I would have thought that like the idea of sound money, the idea of money that can't be printed would be quite appealing to a European audience, but it doesn't quite seem that way. Can you sort of break down like what's going on in Europe from that perspective? I guess it might be broken down into different segments as well, like the political class versus the pleb class, so to speak, and why Bitcoin adoption doesn't seem to be taking off the way it is in like the US, for example.
That's a super great question. I mean, I think generally adoption for sure has a lot to do with culture and the way people think about certain things. Whether people are open-minded, curious, adventurous as well. I think in the US, a lot of people are just inherently adventurous in terms of whether they're like super optimistic, they have a hobby or passion, they just start working on it without even thinking about, what could
Yeah.
happen if it doesn't work out. Obviously, not for everyone, everything works out perfectly, but I think this fundamental drive is what's different, whereas compared to Europe, because in Europe, a lot of people are always super risk averse, which I don't know where that is exactly comes from. Maybe it's because of the all the wars we had, and all the generations
Fair. Yeah.
afterwards are being like, I don't know, like do something that pays well, do something real, don't go into arts. Save your money is actually also something that's, super kind of that comes from this post-war generation. And so I think I wouldn't entirely agree that the adoption is lacking in Europe. I think it's just very different. Like the type of Bitcoiners are very different. Whereas in the US you have a lot of people who start companies in that space and who are adventurous and just experiment, also of course in the crypto space, but also in the Bitcoin space. People are more risk averse in Europe, but I think the concept of sound money that you can just buy personally and just hold yourself in your own pocket, so to say, is something that resonates a lot with Europeans, especially Germans. I had the impression.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you're aware of this Germany, even Switzerland and Austria. There's this 21 community. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
I have, but I don't speak German. Okay, I always say this. I did 3 months of German. I can say Die Katze ist auf dem Tisch, I think.
Sehr gut.
But I don't speak German, so I don't pay attention to that community because of the language barrier.
Right, it makes a lot of sense. So just to give you a little bit of context, there's this 21 community, which is like a grassroots kind of community of meetups. There's also a podcast that's associated to them, but it's not really one company, right? It's more like a brand, but like a distributed kind of meetup brand. Like everybody can start their own meetup and use the 21 logo. And let me actually check on the map. I'm not entirely sure, but I think there's now over 500, 600, 700 meetups across Germany,
Wow.
Switzerland. And that's like insane. That's like, if you compare that with any other country, it's much, much further in terms of like this.
It's very dense.
It's very dense, right? Also because like Germany, Switzerland, Austria, it's not that much space in terms of like the land, right? And then having like almost 1,000 meetups is crazy. Again, I'm not entirely sure how many, but yeah, let's say between 500 and 1,000. I'm not entirely sure. This grows a lot, and so essentially in any city in Germany, you can go to a meetup and talk to other people who are interested in Bitcoin. And if I think about kind of, if we compare the US Bitcoiner again with a European or like a German Bitcoiner, the German Bitcoiner is like, I don't know, he can be a teacher, he can be a professor, he can be a plumber, he can be an artist, he can be like a high school student, he can be. It's super interesting going to these meetups because it it looks like a very weird kind of group because it's not at all homogeneous, right?
Yeah.
It's like completely random people who would have never met if it were.
Yeah.
And if we compare that, that's more like the German kind of community. Also age-wise, huge variations.
Yeah.
A lot of like 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds. The other day I was talking to like a gold bug, like a gold investor. I don't know how old he was, probably like 70. And he was at this meetup and he was like, hey, so apparently you know a little bit about Bitcoin.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Like I have my gold bug friends and I'm trying to convince them, but I'm not sure how this works entirely and all that kind of stuff. And that's something I think that makes European Bitcoiners, but especially like German-speaking area, super unique, I feel like, and super grassroots. Whereas in the US, probably it's more about this entrepreneurial looking thinking. Whereas in Germany, it's more like, let's remember what my grandmother used to say, like, save some money,
nice.
Like, don't just spend your money on random stuff, like think about how you spend your money and save it for the future and stuff like that. That's the narrative people like in Germany and Europe. And
how does that compare to Paris then? Because I Theo, I had a few people from Bull Bitcoin on the podcast, and I did ask the question, but they were speaking more about, like, I'm going to be polite. They were speaking more about altcoins in terms of adoption of, like, within the pleb network, if you will, as opposed to the save your money kind of mindset. Like, they were talking more about gambling and stuff.
Yes, I mean that's been my experience as well.
Okay.
For sure. Like apps like Binance, for example. There are so many there's so many French people I know that are not really understanding the tech behind it, but they have their Binance app and they like trade and they talk to you about this new coin that exists that's going to revolutionize stuff. And
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I mean they are definitely much more passionate when they talk about these projects. Um, but at the same time, then not doing a lot of due diligence. Um, so I don't know. I think the German community is definitely more risk averse, and you know,
Yeah.
a lot of people who come across Bitcoin in the German speaking community, they don't actually buy Bitcoin for the first 1 or 2 years sometimes, you know? Like there are a lot of people who go to these meetups more often and often and often, and they don't actually have never purchased it because they try to understand it first and try to kind of, you know, do I do KYC? Do I not do KYC?
Yeah.
How do I approach it? And how do I store it? And so like whereas the French people maybe because they're just a more passionate bunch and they
Yeah.
and they just just start doing things and saying things and it's their way of life, just do it, just don't think about it. Maybe that's what it is. But
Yeah.
as you mentioned, there's definitely much more crypto in France, whereas Germany is more leaning towards Bitcoin, I would say,
That's
relatively. Yeah.
incredible. I need to figure out a way to learn, I guess, basic German so I could at least read, for example, like tweets or posts that people put out, because my exposure to Europe is really like French speaking exposure to Europe. So it sounds that, like, I mean, with so many meetups and stuff, and the desire to understand and obtain knowledge, it sounds like within the plebs in Germany, at least, there is a bit of a gap between like what the ECB puts out and what the plebs are experiencing and thinking on the ground.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, for example, I don't know if you follow any like posts or newsletters or updates to the ECB website, but Christine Lagarde is speaking about the CBDC that's going to be rolled out in October. Recently, she spoke as well about the fact that stablecoins like USDT, for example, poses a threat to like Europe's sovereignty and stuff. And so I don't hear them mentioning Bitcoin. I don't hear them mentioning anything further besides sort of like stablecoins or crypto. And so with such a high concentration of meetups and pleb networks and stuff that you mentioned in Germany, and the approach to studying as opposed to just like diving in, it sounds like there's a gap between, what the central bank is saying and what the people are experiencing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't exactly know why politicians don't really care about it at all. I guess the only kind of hypothesis I have around that is that, because the European Union is such or at least in the beginnings of it, was such an important project for peace in Europe, and issuing like this additional currency, the euro, on top of that, for many, I think, who are super pro EU, is like it's like non-negotiable. For them, a world where all the countries would go back to having their own national currencies is not compatible with a world that is like peaceful and open inside of Europe. I think there's like the disconnect. So what I'm essentially saying is that for them it's like either we have the euro, or it's going to be bad, the future is going to be bad, and there's going to be problems, and markets closing off, and all these kind of dynamics, more hate between different countries. And I think that's what kind of what's being associated with the euro not working out. That's my guess. Yeah.
So it's not about technology, it's about culture and history, like you mentioned.
I think so, especially on the political level, because right now, with essentially with the EU or the West in general, having kind of slowly gone more to the left, I would say, over the past 20 years, if you compare it, and then everybody kind of now, like all the right wing political parties getting more momentum. They are like kind of fearful, I think, that this will create tension and will break up the existing kind of political structure in the EU and also on the national level. And so that's why, like, for them it's all about the symbolic aspect of the euro, which I can kind of understand. I just think that just because there wouldn't, or even if we wouldn't have a euro, it's not like we're going to go to like start wars again in Europe. I don't think so. But yeah, again, that's like being associated with it. It's all about the symbolic value, for sure.
So how does innovation then, how being optimistic and positive, if you want to hold on to that symbolism, how do you then incorporate innovation so that collectively all of the countries within the European Union don't get left behind by the US or El Salvador or Kenya or elsewhere or the UAE, where they are quickly trying to figure out how to incorporate Bitcoin? And I should say as well digital currencies, because it's true.
That's a good question. I don't have a straight answer to that. I think there's a lot of issues that we have on the European level, in the European Union, around regulation. A lot of the kind of good intent that some politicians might have had around these regulations just have turned out to be super bad for innovation. Not only on the kind of banking and payments level, but also on the regarding AI, for example, right? About this like GDPR data processing problem that we have, that a lot of AI companies can't really offer their services here. On the other hand, there have been some, I would say, positive developments over the last 5 to 10 years around, like we have this regulation now, we have to do all this compliance stuff in the banking system, but at least, let's kind of regulate it to a point where private companies can't really benefit from this huge regulation, which is, I think that's a little bit of a difference between the US and Europe. Is like in the US, you have a lot of regulation within the banking system, but it seems like politicians are not super interested to make it cheap for the people. There's a lot of power from private companies, and if I can give a concrete example, in Europe, the kind of interbank fees that are associated, that have to be paid on every single Visa card transaction and MasterCard transaction, it's regulated down to 0.2% of the value. And these 0.2%, this interbank fee, is part of the total, let's say 1.5-2% cost that a merchant has to pay, right?
Oh, okay.
That's like part of it. That has been kind of regulated by the EU to kind of, they've looked at it. They saw that there's a kind of duopoly of Visa and MasterCard, and they realized, okay, like they are setting prices however they want. Let's kind of, regulate it down and limit it. I think in the US, I'm not entirely sure how it works, but I think it's like at 1.5% or 1.8%. Or maybe even higher.
Depending on the card. Sometimes it's 3%. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And I mean, that kind of enabled business models such as the Fold card, for example, where you can get like 2% in Bitcoin cashback, right? That's not possible in the EU because it's been regulated down to 0.2%. So, it's kind of in the US shows again that the market can kind of solve these issues, but on the
Yeah.
other hand, it's also not a bad thing to be, to regulate it down for this duopoly that we have. Um, Another great thing, or like another positive thing, is the SEPA instant kind of adoption, regulation around that, where essentially, every wire transfer within the EU has to be instantaneous.
Yeah.
And I think on January 9th of this year, um, since then, essentially every single bank that receives a SEPA instant transaction has to credit it to the user immediately. So essentially, ever since like 3 months ago, every single bank in Europe can receive SEPA instant transactions instantaneously. And I think in October of this year, it's going to be also for outgoing payments, meaning then essentially starting this year, every single wire transfer is going to be instantaneous. So
Like internationally
just
or?
within the EU, it's
Oh,
gonna
okay.
it's
Yeah.
gonna have to be. It's required that it's instantaneous and essentially free. So like
Trade-offs.
trade-offs. I still think that regulation costs us a lot of opportunity. If you look, at what kind and what kind of companies kind of have been founded over the past 50 years in Europe, and like all these internet companies are all US based, essentially.
Yeah.
They just started doing without asking for permission, essentially. And
Yeah.
in Europe, it's also a cultural thing. It's not only regulation; it's also cultural.
Yeah.
That people just are fearful of doing something wrong. Um, and so also, some people, obviously, there's some projects that have appeared, like some crypto projects that have appeared in 2017. So some people are different. They just, I'm just going to launch this token and it's going to be fine. But overall, there's not, I think, again, crypto is probably more US kind of thing on average.
Shout out to the Orange Manufacturing Group. They helped me with my logo design, and you know that I'll be ordering their premium hardwood sign and lightning keychain. Accessories are curated from a selection of durable traditional materials built to last. Use the Geyser Fund link in the show notes to take advantage of their trust minimal process. Or to save 5%, go to omg21btc.com. That's omg21btc.com and use code AAB21Q. Yeah, I remember, I think it was in the Bitcoin Standard where Saifedean talks about, so he says socialism specifically as a model. One of the big issues is the fact that it is so difficult to predict and to foresee how things will evolve. And therefore, any regulations you put in place today will be obsolete or a block, or they will pose a problem for tomorrow. And I personally believe that we're living through like serious disruption when it comes to money and the geopolitical order and stuff. So like to see how companies, which is where I'm going with this question, in Europe navigate this space with regulation is fascinating. So with Wavecard, so tell us more about it, who your customers are, and how you actually navigate this regulatory space.
Sure. So, as mentioned in the beginning, our kind of sole mission is to enable Europeans to live on Bitcoin. And, even though a lot of people say that, you shouldn't kind of sell your Bitcoin, we take the other stance where we're like, if you only have Bitcoin because you just essentially sold every euro that you had to buy more Bitcoin,
Yeah.
what are you going to do then? Then you're going to probably
Yeah.
start either taking out a loan against it or start selling it. And that's exactly like our target group. So essentially, what we're providing is right now we have two tools that are live. The first tool is essentially a way to buy to your own self-custodial wallet straight from your bank account. So
Oh, okay.
you get a virtual IBAN that's issued in your own name, and you get a kind of a banking address essentially. You just send money, as much money as you want. You don't have to kind of preemptively tell us how much you want to buy. You just send 500 euros, for example, and the moment we receive it, we automatically buy Bitcoin with it, and then you can withdraw it to whatever kind of wallet that you want. That's kind of the first kind of trading exchange product that we have. And and on the other hand, the other direction also works. You log in, you see a Bitcoin deposit address, you send as much Bitcoin as you want, we exchange it, we send it out the other side to your personal bank account. And the good thing or the cool thing with our product compared to exchanges is that sometimes when I don't know which exchanges actually do that. I think Kraken did that for a while. Other companies did that for a long time. When you sell Bitcoin and you withdraw euros to your bank account, the wire transfer is being done by like some random company or seemingly random company. And so,
Yeah, okay.
when you receive funds from Kraken, for example, and it's just it's not from yourself, it's from a random company, then your own bank usually, or like it can happen that your own bank asks questions around, why is this company sending you money? What's this company doing? How are you involved
Yeah.
with them? And so the cool thing about our product is that since we issue an IBAN in your own name, the euros that we send to you come from your own bank connection, essentially, from an IBAN in your own name. So essentially, your own bank where you receive your euros doesn't actually know that it's crypto related or similar. So they can't freeze your bank account. They can't really, they're gonna. There's some law requiring them to ask certain questions,
Yeah.
starting at I think it's 12,500 euros. It's like the European kind of amount per transaction where they have to ask questions and have to track it. But it's like a personal wire transfer from one bank account of yours to another. So it's much more secure and works better. And the other product that we offer is what you mentioned, which is Wavecard, which is a Bitcoin Visa card, a debit card that you can top up with Bitcoin and then essentially spend anywhere you want. And so like whenever you tap to pay, whenever you make a payment, we take a small chunk of your Bitcoin, like a couple of sats, essentially, sell them to euro to essentially
Okay.
fund the transaction.
And is this for the debit card, or the Visa card, is it KYC, or is it possible to do it anonymously or pseudonymously?
So the Visa card on our end, you have to KYC.
Okay.
I know that there are a couple of other cards out there that don't require you to do KYC, but it's a different class of Visa card. So, Visa and MasterCard, they are able to kind of issue these non-KYC cards because they limit where you can use them essentially. So, as a comparison,
This is a world that I'm interested in
yeah,
learning more about.
yeah. So, I mean, to give you numbers, I think there's 150 million Visa merchants in the world. So with our card, essentially everything is unlocked. You can use them wherever you want.
In the
In
world.
the world, wherever you are,
Yeah.
there are no foreign exchange fees. So essentially, it's straight Bitcoin to your local currency, essentially. And this other class of card that doesn't require KYC is limited to, I think it's 30 million. So it's about a fifth of all the Visa merchants where you can pay with that card. I think they essentially have limited certain categories where you can pay with those cards, which is probably like gambling related services, financial services, and certain other things you can't pay with those cards. So there's like this differentiation, and since our mission is to be like, like you can pay anywhere and always, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter where you
Ice
are.
cream. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just said let's do KYC. It's it's something people are used to. I know people don't like it, but kind of that unlocks that you can use your card anywhere essentially.
So, I guess for like a user, you just see the Visa logo and you assume that it's like, Visa, you can pay anywhere. But under the hood, how is the differentiation made between which merchants will accept that Visa? Like if I have a store and I see a certain type of Visa card as a merchant, will I say, oh, that card won't work here? Or is it like just on the banking end of things that occurs?
No, that's purely on the banking side. So essentially, you would try to pay with it, and it would just say declined, and that's it. The merchant wouldn't know what happened. You probably wouldn't know what happened because it's not like common knowledge, to understand that there are
Yeah.
different classes of Visa cards. But yeah, probably if you read the fine print, it's not just Visa, but it's Visa, and then I think they call them gift cards.
Or vouchers or yeah.
So it's like I think it's like I wouldn't say relict from an older time, but it's like this product was invented by Visa to essentially enable companies to give their employees these Visa cards, these prepaid Visa cards you can use anywhere without KYC. And so like, I mean, it's clever, as like a Bitcoin
Yeah.
company or crypto company to use that product and then kind of facilitate the bridge between crypto and without KYC. It's good, but yeah, those are very limited cards.
Yeah.
But
Oh, so. Oh, go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
just lastly, around the Wavecard, at least from the merchant's perspective, you can be pseudonymous because we don't actually tell you what name you have to put on your card. So my holder's name is Satoshi Nakamoto. So you can use whatever name you want. So at least from that angle, it's pseudonymous essentially. The merchant doesn't get any information.
Yeah, like you can have a hotel with a bunch of bookings under Satoshi Nakamoto.
Exactly. Yeah, I was making this post on Twitter about Amazon now getting a huge wave of Satoshi Nakamoto's starting to pay because as a Bitcoiner using Wavecard, if you can choose any name you want, what's probably a name that many people will choose. Yeah.
That's a good idea because I find, because my name is on the internet, when I order certain things, so I don't get things delivered to my home anymore. I use, in Switzerland, in French, it's called poste restante. So it's not, I've got a PO box, but they don't accept physical deliveries. I get everything sent to the post office, and then I go there and pick it up. But having a card where I could just, like none of my details are available, where the merchant doesn't accept Bitcoin, is like an added layer of just protection that I think more and more about.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to ask you as well, because I saw on your Twitter profile that you're part of the European Acceleration. I'm looking down to make sure I'm saying it properly. What does that entail? Like, what is it and what does it entail?
So, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as being part. I mean, I kind of support it, right? I'm not
Okay.
super active in this, but in either case, it's like a grassroots movement of kind of entrepreneurs and founders and investors and just people who want to do stuff in Europe, trying to kind of get politicians to reduce regulation, to make easier to found companies, to make it easier to just start creating things. And why I'm kind of representing that or try to represent it is because I think this time we really have a good shot of actually changing stuff. Because like over like 10 years ago, for example, I think the need wasn't really there, or at least not on the political level. And now with AI kind of pushing it, with with like just looking at the investments into AI companies and big AI companies that kind of were born in France or in Germany, they kind of fleeing to the US because they just get more money there. And the question is, why is that? Why is Klarna, a big fintech giant in Europe, why did they consider to do an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange and not in Europe, if it's a European company, right? And so like it's about solving those issues, and there's a huge momentum behind it. Like essentially virtually every single venture capital fund and every single kind of known founder in Europe is supporting it. Even like the Stripe co-founders are pushing this. Like everybody realized that now we have a chance at kind of evening the playing field. And essentially, what does it mean to even the playing field? It's I think two main things. The first is to create essentially establish a new European EU-wide corporate entity, which is essentially identical in every single country in Europe, and which doesn't require any notarization process.
Okay.
Because the problem is, I mean, we are also just now starting to fundraise, and what's becoming interesting and clear in the first couple of talks is that some US-based investors, they just don't invest into German companies. They just don't do it, right? Even if they would like to invest, they're not going to do it because in Germany you have this notarization requirement where essentially most of the every single investment process has to be done in person in Berlin at the notary office, or you have to send a representative, you have to get like certain like it's a huge pain. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The US investors, they have no idea of how the law works. They have no idea of how is this going to continue? Like how can we is the kind of the cap table is there differences between German law and US law and all this kind of stuff? And so that's the goal, essentially, to facilitate, to create like a structure that is very close to what the Americans are dealing with in Delaware. So like many startups.
Yeah, Delaware.
People just create Delaware companies because they can just do it at a click of a button. They just pay a bit of money, and the entire world knows how to invest into that vehicle. And I mean, I don't know how to invest into French companies, Spanish companies, Italian companies. I don't know how that works. I only know German, the German law, but also not that specific. I'm not a lawyer. And so, that's like the mission, to create this entity which doesn't require any notary process for any kind of investing or selling, like of assets, of equity. And at the same time, which is just very similar to the US Delaware thing. And
So you have participants from all European countries, or is it mostly like German and French participants?
Actually, it's something that's purely on the EU level being done. So meaning,
okay.
because the problem is these notary lobbies are super strong in those countries, and they tell you, but we need notaries to make sure that the contract is valid and stuff like that. Which obviously in a world which is digital with like digital signatures and so on, it's outdated, right? But so that's why like these countries, Germany or France or other countries on a national level, they don't actually push this. They don't want this because the lobbies are too strong. But that's why now we have a shot, because apparently some people in the EU Commission think that it's interesting and that it's important. And essentially, I think the deadlines are to create a outline this year, and then hopefully as early as next year, every single European will have the option to create a company for, I don't know, $100 on the internet in a couple of clicks, and just start getting investments, start just going on their journeys. Yeah.
So this begs the question. So I can apply for a French passport if I want to, because my husband is French. He's got the passport. So does my daughter. But I don't want to, because, you talk about investing in a business. I feel like I don't know what is in the pipeline, and it just seems like a headache for no reason. But part of my confusion is this. Who leads Europe? Is it the governments within the individual countries? Is it really Brussels and the EU? Like, is it sort of like a weighted average kind of situation? Like, what's up basically?
Yeah, so I'm no expert in this, but the way I understand it is that most decisions are being done through this weighted average model, where essentially, Germany is having the most inhabitants as a single country in Europe, has a lot of power, and gets more seats in the like, commission and so on. But then on the other hand, nobody really decides anything, because any single country can literally block anything they want. Like there's a lot of kind of like, in order to make these bigger changes that require like changing of laws and national laws, the European Union has a model where any single country can kind of veto something. And that's why like nothing happens, because we have so many countries, and for any real deep changes structurally, everybody would have to agree. And to your leadership question, nobody really leads the EU. I mean, there's von der Leyen, the EU commissioner, which technically I guess is the head of the EU. But at the end of the day, she also does, I guess, mainly the bidding of her German party, essentially.
I didn't know she was part of a political party in Germany. Oh, okay.
Yes, she was part of the party that is now trying to post the chancellor in Germany. They have a lot of issues right now getting
Okay.
they're trying to get the majority, and it's kind of on the fence, and there were a lot of promises they made before the election earlier this year, and then now they just do a complete 180.
Oh dear.
And so like everybody's like, is this even legal? I mean, technically it is legal. There's nothing against a party promising one thing and just delivering another. But still, there's a question of kind of political legitimacy, generally. Like that's a general discussion right now in Germany. So it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen. And I'm not sure if the government that they are trying to build now is going to survive for 4 years. I'm not sure, to be honest. It's very that's the situation in Europe, right, in general. But just to give you, I think honestly, who leads Europe, looking at foreign policy mostly, it's probably Macron, and maybe Macron, maybe the Italian Prime Minister. Yeah, I don't know.
She was in the U.S. recently. I don't know if you've heard of I hope I'm saying this right, Guns, Goats, and Gold, or Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast with Tom Luongo. Are you familiar with Caitlin Long? She has a bank in Wyoming.
Yeah.
They did, or I should say, I listened to the episode she was on last week, and they were speaking about the Eurodollar system and why the bond market at one point in the US was crashing and why the gold market, the gold price, sorry, was rallying. And the hypothesis is that it was European entities selling US treasuries to try to disrupt the treasury market in the US because I guess, TLDR, they're not a fan of Trump's policies. And it would seem as though there's like a monetary war that's happening between the US and the EU or the ECB right now. And so they were saying that the reason the Italian prime minister visited the US is to discuss trade one-on-one with her. And again, hypothesis, I don't know. But one, I guess, tactic that the Trump administration may be using is sort of a divide and conquer because like Europe, I mean, it seems to be kind of headless. And so if it's possible to broker deals with individual countries with different sort of trade agreements per country, then it might be a tactic that the Trump administration can be using.
Yeah, I think I would agree for sure. If you look at just the way, like the very first thing, right, he did when like he announced these crazy tariffs on essentially the entire world,
Yeah.
and I think it was kind of, I mean, it was a tactic, right? He didn't actually think that they're gonna leave those tariffs on forever. And then just put on these tariffs, and then they essentially waited and see who's gonna call me now, who's gonna try to make a deal with me. So yeah, I would fully agree with that. Yeah, and Europe is kind of headless. I would agree with that too. Let's see what's gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I like whenever I speak to, or I should say, whenever now, especially French people speak to me about Bitcoin, I'm less active in going out there. I always say, like it's kind of like your parents fighting. You let them do their thing and you always save in Bitcoin so that if you need to leave, you can, and you have a level of freedom and a level of sovereignty and you're not at risk. For example, the other thing that I saw in the news was the European Union looking to the savings of individuals in order to finance, their defense, whatever they're doing with respect to Ukraine. And if individuals are willing to go along with that, fantastic. But if you're not willing and they see, all of these euros parked in bank accounts because people are saving and they try to persuade you or they take it, especially if there is a CBDC in place, to me, that's a violation of individual rights. What if you don't agree? What if you don't want war? Like what, it just it seems scary to me as still a North American.
I would fully agree with that. It's super scary. I think a lot of people in the EU still have too much trust and faith in their government. Like I think it's also important to understand that many of these politicians are not fundamentally, like they don't fundamentally have only ill intent. Like most of the
Yeah.
times they're just super incompetent. They
Oh,
don't, yeah, they're like super
yeah.
incompetent. They think that uh, they don't actually think about the risks of what they're trying to achieve. Um, you know, one famous quote by the currently kind of uh, almost chancellor of Germany. He mentioned last year that the exact same thing. He was like, there's 2.5 trillion euros on German savings account. And then he was like, what if we could tap into that to fund infrastructure and so on, right? And I don't understand how he can really say that with a straight face. To me that's crazy. And
Yeah.
and that's also a little bit like why we're working on what we're working on. in Europe because we're like, don't have any euros. Probably that's the best thing you can do. Just have no
Yeah.
euros, and we build the tools for you to kind of, just have no euros and pay your rent and pay your groceries, as long as you still have to with euro. Um, but yeah, it's super scary. It's super scary. I think that I think that the kind of supreme courts of the EU and on the national levels kind of are still intact and have common sense and kind of not going along with this. That's my only hope, right? That I have that this kind of system still works on that side because obviously for all these like bigger changes they want to do, it has to go through multiple kind of levels, and yeah, it is scary. I don't know what else to tell you. It's
Well, you could be seeing an influx of customers soon as like, the whole CBDC thing gets closer, if they're even closer to seizing. Seizing sounds so harsh, but utilizing the savings of individuals, that might be like a push for, especially, I guess, older generations to learn more about Bitcoin and to figure out how to protect themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think I see more and more like older people also at these meetups trying to understand what's happening because for them obviously, they imagine someone is 70 years old. He has lived through a phase of German history where the economy was going great. Wasn't a lot of regulation. The kind of how do you say when political parties they essentially have a guideline like a platform to run on, and
Yeah.
those platforms back in the day were like half a page, you know, like
Oh,
parties were
wow.
like,
Simplicity.
yeah, they were like,
Yeah.
we focus on security, on, I don't know, internal safety, on open kind of foreign policy and stuff like that, and that's it. Now these new kind of coalition contracts, how they are called in Germany, because it's mostly a coalition of multiple parties that form a government. Um, they now have like 18 pages. It's like,
Wow.
and those people who are now the older generation who kind of don't are fed up with this, they are kind of slowly but surely looking into Bitcoin. I think actually, um, I think the kind of class of people who will adopt Bitcoin as the last kind of people will be the super high educated ones. That's my
Oh, yeah.
thesis.
Yeah. Croesus. Yeah.
That's like on one hand, people who have master degrees, PhDs, who are professors, people who work for universities, people who work for the state, people who don't have a concept of what it actually means to work in like the free market economy kind of, where you have to actually understand what are my skills, where can I apply my skills to earn money,
What value do I actually give to people? Yep.
exactly, right? And so yeah, I think those people will probably are the ones who have still the highest trust in those institutions and who would always kind of find a logical reason why not to adopt Bitcoin. Because those are smart people most of the time. They just, have a different kind of view of the world still, I would say.
Yeah. They're guided by incentives that right now play in their favor. But actually, I used to work with a German colleague, a Rainer, and I think he mentioned that actually in Germany, I hope I'm remembering this right, the banks were already decentralized, right? Is that correct?
In Europe,
In Germany, specifically Germany, like there was already as a type of decentralization of banks, like per region or something. Oh, maybe that's wrong.
well, yes, to some degree. So what Germany has, I would say, probably 3 to 5 big banks, such as like Bank, then there's the Commerzbank. Um, I would say probably Hypovereinsbank is also quite large. There's a couple of larger banks that also do like international kind of business. And then there's this kind of bank franchise that's called Sparkasse. And essentially, those banks are super small banks who just manage money from kind of a communal area. So there's,
Okay.
I don't know how many there are. There's probably over 200, 300, I would guess, but there's just many small banks. There's a Sparkasse Aachen, there's a Sparkasse Berlin, there's a Sparkasse München, there's a Sparkasse, name any other small city that exists, right, in Germany. And since Germany is kind of made out of a lot of small and decentralized kind of cities, I would say, we don't,
Yeah.
the biggest city is Berlin with 3 million. And then we have, I think, Munich probably with 1 million, maybe it's a little bit larger. We have Hamburg, another 1 million, Cologne, 1 million. But, the big cities maybe make 7 million. And then we have 81 million who live in like smaller cities. And all these kind of cities have banks. It's quite decentralized, but at the same time, so they can all make their own decisions. But at the same time, they run under this kind of umbrella system still. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So I need to practice or learn German and like visit. I've been to Berlin a few times, and Berlin's a good city to have fun in.
For sure. It's very international. I like Berlin. There's you can find anything here. Anything and any kind of group of people that interest you and kind of, Bitcoiners. Berlin was the very first Bitcoin meetup in the world, was in Berlin.
In the world?
In the world.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah.
It was held it's called Room 77. There might even be some documentaries about that.
I think I saw something on that a few years ago, and the bar still exists, right?
Not anymore, sadly. I think
Okay.
I think they closed down in COVID, like during COVID times.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, in 2011, the first kind of Bitcoin bar founded in 2011. I think Vitalik Buterin. I'm not kind of pushing altcoins at all, but I think he worked on Ethereum mainly here, or came up with the idea of Ethereum in this bar, right, in Berlin. Crazy. So yeah, a lot of culture here in all the different areas, music and Bitcoin and whatever. Yeah.
The alternatives. Awesome. Well, Felix, we're going to wrap up the interview portion before we get to 21 questions. Can you let people know where to find you, so I say Wavecard, but you said Wavecard is one service. There are two. So can you let people know where to find Wavecard and the other service as well?
Sure. So best would be just to probably go to Wave.Space, which is our kind of core landing page. From there, you can you understand what products we offer. You can check out the platform, and then probably best to also follow us on X at Wavespace _, and then you're essentially up to date.
Awesome. Thank you, and stay tuned for 21 questions.
Keys. Yeah. Man like quite. Man like who? Yeah. Takes her Bitcoin off exchanges under self-custody. She runs her own node, providing liquidity. Yeah, she got her own keys. She got her own keys. She got her own keys. Yeah, she got her own keys. 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 Yeah, she got her own keys.